All right, so we are live there. We'll just let a couple people start getting settled into the room. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to 2021. This is our first SEO from home back from the new year, so welcome back, you guys. We'll give everyone just a few minutes to get settled in there. Super excited to be back this year. It's been a long break. We had a good holiday break from SEO from home over here at Page One Power, so we're excited to have you guys back with us. We'll just go ahead and get jumped into it here. We started just a couple minutes late, had a couple things I had to get squared away. I appreciate you guys hanging on. For those of you who have not joined us before, my name is Ben Jacobson. I am the host of SEO from Home. I'm also the digital marketing strategist here at Page One Power. If you haven't joined us for SEO from Home, this series is something that we put together right at the beginning of the pandemic lockdown, and it's our effort to try to keep the community of SEO connected and be able to allow some really great minds inside of SEO to share what they've learned and things that they're finding out as we go. A lot of trade shows and things like that, as many of you know, have been canceled this last year or so. And so this is kind of our attempt to keep the SEO community connected and share some really great ideas. So the premise of this is we sit down with SEO industry experts. We talk about a lot of different topics. We talk about PPC, we talk about SEO, we talk about content, link building, all sorts of stuff. And today we're going to be actually tackling one of the more difficult areas of SEO, as a lot of people will agree, and that's going to be finding e-commerce opportunities for SEO. So as anyone who has spent any time inside of SEO knows, it's tremendously difficult in order to help e-commerce sites rank. So today we have a very special guest. We're going to be talking with Anisa Awad, and she's going to be going over a bunch of really insightful information about how we can find those opportunities and how we can leverage them. Before we get started, though, I do want to let you guys know that we are going to be recording today's episode. So if you have to step out for any time, or you just want to make sure that everything resonates and you want to watch it again, we typically have it up on our website as well as on our YouTube channel in about 24 to 48 hours. So if you guys do miss anything, we still have that there for you. Next, we're also going to be live tweeting today. So if you do have any questions or if you want to engage that way, definitely follow us at Page One Power. And also, of course, you can follow Anisa at Anisa Awad. That's ANISA AWAD on Twitter. And use hashtag SEO from home. That kind of helps us find the conversation threads there. Also, if you guys want to ask questions, we definitely encourage you guys to ask questions. Audience participation is kind of what makes this more interactive and allows us to kind of beat up some of these ideas. So if you guys look at the bottom there, you'll notice there's a little Q&A box. You can actually click on that. It'll pop open a chat and you can ask us questions. As we're going through, I'll do my best to kind of pop those questions in as we can, but if we don't get to your question, we'll do our best to get to that at the very end. So all of that, my mouth's dry from talking so much. It's been a little while since I've done this. I appreciate you guys bearing with me here, but today we're going to be talking, as I mentioned, about finding e-commerce opportunities and leveraging those to help your site grow. So as I mentioned, Anisa is going to be joining us today. Anisa, tell us a little bit more about yourself and what we're going to be talking about today.
Awesome. Thanks, Ben, for the introduction. And hi, everyone. I can't see your faces, so it's a little bit awkward. So I'm just looking at myself right now. But I really appreciate everyone joining. I'm super excited to be hosting my first webinar with SEO from home. Thank you so much, Ben, and also Andrew, for reaching out and asking me to be part of this. It's a great honor. And I really hope that everyone who is joining the webinar can leave feeling inspired, feeling empowered to start a new year with a new mindset and hopefully learn new things. And even if it's as simple as just coming up with a new tactic or thing that you can improve your work, especially when it comes to e-commerce, I'll be more than happy. And as Ben mentioned, feel free to reach out on Twitter, on LinkedIn, tag me. I'll make sure I'll answer your questions afterwards as well. But yes, my name is Anisa, and I'm the SEO manager at Essence. Essence is a leading e-commerce company that specializes in luxury fashion based in Montreal, Canada. And I have an actual love affair with SEO for a very long time. I've been in love with this industry for the last 6-7 years. I started in digital marketing more generally, but then I focus on SEO, and I find it to be super, super rewarding as an industry, just because of the creativity and the analysis that it requires, and you're continuously learning. So I hope with my experience working on both the agency side, so I worked in agencies globally as well, in Canada and Dubai and so on, in addition to in-house experience with Essence. So being able to really combine both agency and in-house experience, it broadened my perspective and my appreciation for how complex the industry can be and how much knowledge you can apply, and you can help people really reap the benefits of SEO. So that's kind of like a quick intro about myself, and we can get started. And I'm really hoping you guys enjoy it, and we'll have insightful recommendations from it as well. So I'll share my screen.
Looking forward to it.
Awesome. Okay, you can see my screen, right?
Yep, looks good.
Perfect. Awesome. So yeah, today I'll be talking about e-commerce SEO, particularly how can you unlock opportunities that comes to organic search. So as we know, I wanted to do kind of like a quick intro into, like, especially from an e-commerce perspective, 2020 was the year that e-commerce really took off. And as an industry, it's been around actually for many years. And you can even argue like since the 60s, people were interested in the idea of selling things before even the internet really became the internet as we know it. And this is particularly true in the 90s, where the dot-com bubble started, and then people more and more started to understand the powerful medium of the internet. And in the last decade, it became a lot more normalized for people to rely on the internet to make purchases online. And it sounds like very basic to say this right now, but you'll be amazed how much we came along when it comes to building trust in online purchasing. Because even for me, like I remember like when I was in school, I don't remember ever buying things online. But now I do everything online. Like it's so convenient. And especially with like COVID, where people literally we couldn't leave our houses. Also, I hope everyone's staying safe with the insanity that we're living in. So we're just going to be super casual about that on the side. But e-commerce, yeah, exactly. Just like super casual about COVID for a second, and then we focus on e-commerce and SEO, and then that could be a whole other topic. But yes, but e-commerce specifically took off in the last year, and it was a great opportunity for companies to really be much faster and much more agile in adapting to how demanding it is and how much it requires ongoing optimization. So I just wanted to share some kind of stats that I found very interesting before I go into the SEO side of things. So 39% of all global e-commerce traffic comes from search. So that's actually very powerful, and it shows you how much search engines are super important, and they drive actually 10 times more traffic to shopping sites more than social media, which is interesting because yeah, we tend to be really obsessed with like Instagram, Facebook, and so on, but search engines still are very, very important, and you need to understand how they work. And that's why SEO is super relevant. It's about optimizing it for Google and beyond as well. So Google actually receives over 75,000 searches per second. So that's insane. Like in the last couple of seconds I've been speaking, multiply that, and you can imagine how many searches happen as we're speaking. And over 3.5 billion searches on a daily basis. So that's just to like put on scale how insane the internet can be as we are like continuously learning, discovering, and looking for information on the web. So with around 93% of online experiences beginning on Google. So for me, this sets the stage for why this presentation will be super beneficial for you. Because the fact that more than like 93% of people are starting with Google just shows you that you really need to understand how people search. In order to do that, you need to think of every part of the shopping funnel and optimize for it so that when someone goes to Google and tries to find a product or something that you sell, that they're able to find you through Google. Also, mobile commerce is expected to contribute a 72.9% market share of e-commerce by 2021. And the reason I wanted to mention that specifically is because mobile phones, no doubt, are a lot more popular as search devices compared to desktop. So we can even like argue a little bit because especially with COVID and working from home, people went back a little bit more to desktop, but still people actually use their phones a lot more to search for things. And it's even evident in my own experience at work where the traffic that comes from mobile is a lot higher, like actually almost more than 50% comes from mobile devices. So again, you have to keep the mobile first mentality in everything that you do when it comes to like optimizing for e-commerce sites. And lastly, the global retail e-commerce sales will actually reach 4.5 trillion. No pressure. That's a lot of money. So, and it's not going to slow down because this is just prediction for 2021. So you can imagine what's going to happen in 10 years. Maybe we'll have this presentation again in 2020, well, 2030, and then I'll give you another number and we'll see what that number will be. I'm sure it's going to be like double that minimum.
Yeah, some of those numbers are just crazy to try to even wrap your head around. Like 3.5 billion searches sounds like such an insurmountable number. And then you say per day, and then you're like, oh, okay. It's
Casual.
baffling because, I mean, to your point, like there's each one of those searches is some sort of opportunity for someone to rank and for someone to, convert basically. Crazy.
Exactly. Definitely. Then, sorry. So in order for me to make this, because I wanted to really make it practical, because we can talk about this for the next like 3 days and even more, because there's so many things to cover and talk about. So even for me, when I sat down and I put together this presentation, it was very overwhelming at first because I wanted to like think what is the best way to approach this in a way that someone listening to this can action items from it. So I wanted to get right away into like tactics, and I'll talk about strategy at the end, but I wanted to make it tangible so that you can think of it in context to what you actually work on, especially if you're like managing an e-commerce site, whether it's your own business or whether it's someone else's business that you optimize for. So the very first thing is XML sitemaps and indexation. So I think a lot of people will be familiar with this, but I wanted to reiterate a very important point, which is the difference between XML sitemap versus HTML sitemap. And the reason for that, because really, if you understand the difference and you're able to like leverage it differently, it will make a huge difference to how you're actually optimizing your website from a technical standpoint. And it's really the foundation of everything that you do. So think of it as like the building blocks. You have your website. You need to make sure that you have a sitemap. And as the name suggests, sitemap, it's literally a map of your website so that you're helping Google and you're helping other search engines really understand what your website is about. So the XML sitemap is actually for search engines, while the HTML sitemap is for users. So the best way to think of it in a more practical way, sometimes when you go to a website and it says at the footer sitemap and you click on that little tiny thing at the bottom, it takes you to an actual like sitemap that's still HTML because it's part of the website and it's designed for the actual users to find their way around the website. So that's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about XML sitemap. So an example is what I included on the right side. So XML sitemaps are not really viable. They're not like available for the user unless you're an SEO and you're like a nerd, like what I do. I just go and like hack websites and look at their XML sitemaps. Like most people will have no idea what I'm talking about, because you have to access it through an index because it's not part of the visible website. And as you can see, it looks scary for someone who hasn't seen it before because it's very technical and it's just literally an output of URLs that are structured in a way that includes attributes. Examples of that are the most important is the loc. So you can see where it says loc, so that's the location of the URL. And then also there are multiple child sitemaps within the index of the sitemap. So you can categorize it. And the beauty of this, it's not like there's a Bible that tells you you have to do X amount of sitemaps. There's guidelines that you can follow. And that's why I recommend websites like sitemap.org. So this is like a great website for you to understand, and I can mention it to you at the end as well. If you really want to understand the protocol of how to build a sitemap from scratch, it has great references on how to do that. But today I'm not going to go into details. I'm just providing you an overview of that. So it includes attributes like the location of the URL plus last mod, which is when was it last modified. And the reason for that, especially when you're e-commerce, you are literally updating your content every single day, if not every single hour sometimes, especially with bigger e-commerce sites. So you need to always tell Google when you have fresh content. And for that reason, you need to indicate that this was last modified, let's say yesterday or today. And it will ensure that you have a continuous flow of information. And it's super important as well because it really makes it more efficient for websites, especially the ones that are massive websites, like with thousands, millions of URLs, that can be very overwhelming for your crawl budget to try to go through each individual URL. You're telling Google, hey, this is what I want you to crawl, and these are the most important URLs for me. So that way, Google starts to understand, okay, this website contains X amount of URLs, and 50% of them are products, 30% are categories, 20% are blogs, and so on. So it starts to understand what your actual website is about, and it helps you get indexed and get performing better from a search possibility as well, a visibility perspective, sorry. And then the key takeaway that I wanted to emphasize from this as well is you really need to make sure that you're optimizing your indexation rate. So let's say, take a step back, you built your sitemap, you've done a great job, you have the XML index, and there are different ways of building it. Sometimes there are, depending on the CMS that you use, there's plugins that helps you like automatically create the XML sitemap. And sometimes when it becomes a little bit more advanced and you have like dev resources, you can actually build it from scratch, and you can build a database that pulls the information from the website and updates it. So there are really many ways around it. What matters is the output, which is the sitemap index. And it's very important that you also claim your Google Search Console. So Google Search Console is a tool free from Google where it helps you understand your actual search data. So I cannot emphasize enough, you really need to make sure that you have claimed your Google Search Console, because it's like your best friend. It will help you understand how Google sees your website and how it interacts with it, if there are errors, if there are redirects. So you're able to really monitor the health and the indexation of your website. And that way you kind of like covered the tech foundational aspect of your website. So yeah, back to that point around optimizing the indexation rate, many times you need to make sure, especially if it's like a tool that's more like a plugin doesn't take into account clear tech requirements. Sometimes what happens is 404 page gets submitted. So that's an error page. So you're submitting something that's already an error to Google. So you're unnecessarily making your indexation rate lower than what it can be. So just pay attention to like erroring pages. Pay attention to like making sure that the status is 200, that it's an actual page that loads and actually exists. Also, sometimes there's no index pages. And the reason for that, again, depending on the complexity of the website, you can actually input a no index tag, especially when, let's say, products sell out and you don't want Google to index the page anymore. So you're submitting a page where you're telling Google, hey, don't index this. You're like, okay, cool, I'm not gonna index it. And then it lowers your like indexation rate. So just paying attention to these, maybe it's small things, but it really makes a difference to how much you optimize your funnel when it comes to indexation. Also, making sure that you have the correct canonical tags on your URLs, especially if you're operating in international markets. And I'll cover that also in a later slide. But just as an overall, I would always say, make sure that you have a sitemap, an XML sitemap, make sure that it's built and it's following the proper formula of how to build it, and that you're submitting it to Google. And once you do that, don't give up on it, continue to monitor it and continue to use it as a framework for making sure that you're telling Google, these are the pages that are important to me, and this is how they're getting indexed and so on. So that's the first point.
So, and real quick, I just had a question about that. So when you're, so just to make sure that I'm understanding properly what you're saying, so the optimization of your indexation is essentially just making sure that you're not having like dead pages. You're not having 404s, you're not having like errors that are popping up or warnings that are popping up inside of Google Search Console. Am I understanding that correct?
Yes, and I would say even a better way to think about it, because you are submitting a sitemap. And sometimes what happens with many websites, you don't necessarily want Google to crawl every single page of your website every single day. So you really want to prioritize the URLs that are the most important to you. And that's why you want to make sure you're not including errors or redirects or pages that don't add value to what your intention is when it comes to indexation. So that's the best way to think about it, because Google will still discover your website regardless. Like that's the thing with SEO, which can be tricky, especially when you work in-house. It's like an ongoing, you need to always validate, like, why are you doing this? What kind of benefit will bring? And even sitemaps, you can potentially argue that Google will still discover you without a sitemap. But the way it will discover you, it won't be as efficient, and it also won't be as optimized. So why put yourself in a position where you're not optimizing it from a technical standpoint? And that's why sitemaps are important. But Google sometimes will discover pages that you're not submitting. and it will not prioritize them as much as if you were submitting them.
Gotcha. And that's where it kind of falls into where you can no index a page and Google will still index a page. Are you just saying that that's basically when that case happens, Google is going to assign automatically a lower priority to the page that you're no indexing?
It would not index it, because Google will respect that, because you're saying no index, so it will not index it. But what will happen is when you're looking at the number of URLs that you're submitting versus the number of URLs that are indexed, it won't be as accurate, because let's say you're submitting 10 and two of them are no index. So instead of having 100% indexation rate, you have an 80% indexation rate. So why have 80 when you can have hundreds?
Makes sense.
That's a better way of thinking about it.
Totally. Looks like we did have a question. We have a guest asking, should you be descriptive with the names of the different parts of the XML, like products, blogs, recipes?
Yes, 100%. Especially when it comes to, like, think of them as child sitemaps. So you have the main index, which is sitemap underscore, as you can see, like index. So that's like the parent sitemap. But then when you are actually building the child sitemaps based on the content of your website, try to categorize them. So for example, if you know you have products, name one of them products. And it's also very possible that you will have multiple child sitemaps. So it could be like 3 product child sitemaps, and that's okay, especially if you have a lot of URLs. Same thing. So have products, categories, designers, blogs, and so on. So the clearer, the better it is for Google.
Awesome. Love it.
Moving on to the next point, which is internal linking. So for me, this is a very interesting topic because sometimes it's like overlooked, because somehow it's very foundational, yet we don't think of it as important to SEO. And the reason for that, because if you think about SEO, just even whether e-commerce or any industry, SEO really is dependent and interacts with every single aspect of the website, whether it's like user experience, whether it's conversion, whether every aspect of it. So like, let's say you have the best SEO, but then you don't have good UX, then it wouldn't be good. Same thing with like page speed and so on. And then that's why SEO should be at the foundation. Even when you build your website, it should be taken into account from the very beginning. And that's where SEOs become like advocates for what it can do and how much it can really improve the website. And for that reason, when you build a website, you really need to think about whether it's already built or you're already working on it. Think about like the internal architecture, kind of like how the website is structured. And it's very integral, because think of it as a story. You're reading a book. It has like the actual cover. It has the first chapter, the second, the headings. Every aspect is all interconnected because it all tells you a story about that specific thing. Same thing with your website. The internal architecture tells a story about what you're actually wanting from people or what you can offer to people. And that's why it's very important that you're also linking contextually to your pages. And the reason I'm like highlighting contextually, because I would never like say just link within each page just randomly, just because linking is important. Yeah, like just like randomly link pages to each other. No, it should definitely always be linking contextually, because it will enhance your user experience. So think of it as a customer-centric approach, because number one, if you have a page and then that page has a link to the product that you're trying to tell people about, then it's easier for them to find these pages. So it's useful for them. And ultimately, if it's useful for them, it's useful for the search engine. Because like sometimes there's a misconception that, well, it's called search engine optimization, then I'm just optimizing for the search engine. Not really, because because it's a machine. It doesn't understand. It's just following protocol. Versus a human, we actually understand context. We're able to actually interact, and based on how we interact with websites, we give better signals for that. So for that reason, especially from an e-commerce perspective, you have to think about every part: the home page, your product pages, your category pages, and how each one of them interacts. And I specifically highlighted product listing pages, product description pages. So what happens is, and that's usually the formula for most e-commerce, regardless of what industry they operate in, is that there is a PLP, and the PLP is that main page that lists all the products that you're selling. And then when the person clicks on a specific product, it becomes a product description page or a product display page. So you need to talk to each other. These pages need to be connected to each other because it also helps the person, which is the customer, and the search engine understand the relation between them. That, oh, this product belongs to this category and this category belongs to this brand, and they're both part of the same bucket. Okay, now I get it. So now it's kind of a cluster of information. So internal linking is super, super important. I cannot like underemphasize it. And it has to be kind of done from an ongoing and also like a foundational basis. And you can think of it even, you have it, sometimes you have it done in a way that's like organic, and sometimes it's not. That's why you need to like audit your website regularly. Try to identify, like even put yourself as a customer. Like imagine you're a customer and go to your website. I always find that it's a very simple approach, but it's so important. Like kind of like reverse engineering. Like, okay, let me imagine I want to buy this. How would I feel if I go through my website? Would it make sense for me as a first time purchase, or even repeat customers, how I interact with the website? And then they should be connected. So same thing with some websites, they have like blogs. So I'm just like, it could be called blog, editorial, content, whatever you want to call it. But it also can be very useful because this content can also be connected to your product pages. So it could be that, let's say, I don't know, I'm just give it an example. Like we're writing about toilet paper. I don't know why I just thought of that terrible example. I blame COVID. So I think you're writing about that. You're saying like top toilets brand, whatever. And then you're like linking from this blog post to your products that you're selling, so that you are encouraging people to also not bounce off your website, and encouraging them to click further and interact and spend more time. So even if they don't convert right away, at least you're encouraging that user flow throughout the website. So that's really important when it comes to like e-commerce SEO as well.
I think even this relates back to something that you had said even just a few minutes ago, and that was you when you're going through like your sitemap, like you're something that you said kind of stood out to me, like you're justifying each page. Like each page needs to exist for a reason. And I think that this even ties into that so well. And with internal linking, what I've found is that there should be a page that answers a question for, you know, the variety of questions that your customers or your potential customers are asking. And so by having the internal linking, like you shouldn't have a bunch of pages that are just orphaned, like out by themselves without having anything linking to it, because if you do, it's a pretty good sign that you're not providing like very relevant information. Like
Mm-hmm.
each page or each element on your website should go back and have some reason for being there, and that reason should translate to an internal link somehow. So
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you have a page, it's like when you build that page, you need to be like, where is going to be pointing to this? Like, how are people going to get here? And I think that's where you can like start to build your internal linking, is like understand like the real reason for creating that content in the first place. And then like all the rest of the internal linking is going to be really straightforward and obvious almost, because you're like, yeah, of course, people that are asking about, you know, 2-ply versus 3-ply or whatever, like they need to know this type of information, and I have a page or I have an article that has this. And
Mm-hmm.
then inside of that article you're linking to the different products that you're talking about. So I mean, just having like, if you put on like, if you take a step back and almost put on like the hat of, does this make sense to a customer, it makes things start to kind of fall in place a little bit more, I've found.
Exactly. 100%. And for me, that's why like we can talk about tactics and strategies like all we want, but if you're not really thinking about the customer first, then you're missing the whole point.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why for me, like SEO is integral, because it should be thought about every part of your journey. And obviously, especially when it comes to e-commerce, it's a lot more complex, because sometimes it's as simple as shipping strategy. Like that's why e-commerce is a very interesting topic, and we can even approach it from different points of view. But I'm only focusing on SEO today. But then you can also think about like even how your customer, the minute they order from your website, how you interact with them afterwards, what kind of information you provide them, how you follow up. All of that is part of the customer journey. And that's why it should be even thought about before they even discover your website, so that every step along the way, you already optimized for them before they even find you on Google.
Agreed.
And with that thinking, like wow, you can do so much if you think like that.
Yeah, and I often think that SEO is completely mischaracterized by the general populace, because I think anytime that anyone that knows what SEO is, maybe just like in passing, even like they think that it's to your point earlier, just designing for the machines. And like the one thing that really clicked for me, like when I was on my path to learning SEO, was design for people. Like if you're making something that a person is going to want to interact with, then like you're likely on the right path for SEO. And that was a big kind of switch for me, is like it's not just machines. Like the machines are trying to emulate humans, so design for the human, and then you're going to be basically meeting like the algorithm where it's trying to go. So instead of trying to chase the tail of what SEO is doing, if you just design for the same North Star that SEO is shooting for, which is designing for humans and making the best experience possible, providing the
Mhm.
best answers, then you're going to be pointing at the same goal that all of the search engine algorithms are trying to get to as well.
Exactly. Precisely. Awesome. And then structured data. So this is where it gets a little bit more complex, because structured data is one of these topics that has been around actually since like 2011, I would say. And it was very interesting. It's the best way to think about it is schema. And it can be a bit of a scary word. It's like, what is schema? Like, what do you mean schema? What can we do with schema? And especially it can be sometimes not thought of as an integral part of e-commerce SEO, but it's really, really useful. And I'll talk about it more in terms of why it's important, how can you actually implement it. But the best way to kind of like humanize schema, it's really kind of a code that you put on your website that helps search engines really pull information from your website in a more efficient way. And there are different kinds of schemas. There is like website schema, org schema, and so on. But the reason it's important, because it's one of these things that was a collaborative project between three competing search engines, like Yahoo, Bing, and Google. So you wouldn't think they're best friends because everyone's trying to like take, obviously Google will always be the biggest out of them, but they're all competing for like people to use them as search engines.
Sure.
But they all came together in 2011 and we decided, okay, let's build some sort of a platform where we can standardize web content and we can allow webmasters ability to understand why schema is important and why they should implement it, because it helps our search engines pull information from their website faster. So it's kind of like lines of code, lines of information that facilitate the ability to pull information from your website faster. So that's kind of like a general definition of schema. But why it's important, because schema is so fascinating when it comes to like how much it can create richer results. And what I mean by that, sometimes when you go to Google, even if I just like go like a bit rewind to like early Google days, back in the days, and I mean, we're not that old, but I do remember when I used to like search on Google and it was only blue links. It was only like literally 10 results and it's links and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's so dynamic. You go to a search result on Google and it has map, images, news, social media, knowledge pan, like so much ways of presenting data. And it became a lot more complex. And that's why SEO had to adapt, because we had to understand, you know what? We're no longer just optimizing for a click on a URL. We're trying to capture people's attention in different formats, whether it's images, whether it's like a map listing, or even, you know, that knowledge panel that you see. Like, let's say you just go, I don't know, search Joe Biden, because I saw like it's happening right now in the US. Like if you search him and you see like on the right side, his knowledge panel,
Mm-hmm.
that gets pulled from multiple sources, whether it's Wikipedia, images from different sources, from newspapers. This is where Google became not just a search engine, in my opinion, it became like a knowledge engine. And Google by itself has become so big because it became the de facto method of finding information. Like even my dad tells me, like I ask him a question, he's like, Google it. I'm like, thanks, Dad. Like this is where you like just Google it, figure it out. You know, so it became like de facto way of us how we think about the world and how we find information. And the reason I mentioned this because I want to pull it back to schema, because schema really helps you create a better way of presenting information, which can actually lead to higher click-through rates, especially when it comes to organic results. Because from an e-commerce perspective, examples of the most commonly used ones are ratings, pricing, availability. And this is specifically useful for e-commerce because we're actually selling products. If it was like a website for, let's say, a travel destination, you don't really need to like sell it. You don't have a price on it. Yeah. Versus if you're selling products, you need to actually have attributes like, are they in stock, out of stock? how much they cost, what currency, is it on sale, how people rated it. Like it's a lot more interactive that way. And you can use Schema as a way to help create that information so that when you search it on Google, when you get that URL, at the bottom you see, and I'm sure you've seen examples where it says like in stock, or it has the price, or it has like 3 stars. This all comes from Schema implementation. That's why you should really, if you haven't done it yet, implement it. I highly recommend it. And there are so many different types of Schema, and schema.org, I included a screenshot on the right side, is a great resource. Like think of it as your like guru when it comes to like learning about Schema from scratch, trying to understand like how to actually do it, what kind of attributes you need to follow. Sometimes they're optional, sometimes they're mandatory, but ultimately they all help you create better structured information so that when Google crawls your website, it automatically knows, okay, this website has a product schema. And the product schema includes information like the name of the product, the name of the brand, the price, the availability, the image URL, the location it's sold on. So it gives like 1, 2, 3, 4. It gives you that information at a glance. Instead of trying to crawl an entire page to understand what you're telling it, it goes to your schema, it pulls it, okay. Now it gets it. Now it's like, okay, this website sells product, I get it. I can immediately understand how it relates to search intent, and then it's optimized for the keyword that the person is looking for. So if you're selling like, let's say, like you sell computers, so it knows, okay, apple.ca or apple.com, they sell computers, they sell laptops, they sell phones, and so on. It's able to correlate that information. Any questions before? Because the second slide is related to this as well.
No, I think I don't see any questions coming through here. But yeah, I've definitely seen I mean, if you even just think of your own shopping experience, like if you're trying to find something quickly, like I personally click on the links that have way more information tied to them, because to me, this is like a weird subconscious thing that maybe I do, but like a website that is up to date and is like leveraging all of their available tools to get my attention, like to me, I can see past that and I'm like, I know that they're doing that so that it works, but to me it subconsciously says, hey, they have their ducks in a row, like they have everything organized. The product I'm going to get is probably going to be good, as opposed to like if I have to click through and like dig through your website to find a basic thing that I'm looking for, it's the chances of me actually pulling out my credit card to make that purchase are significantly less. And that's, I mean, I'm in marketing. I come from a background of fully understanding what's going on, but to me, it just seems like it makes so much more sense if you have all of the tools available to you and you're using those effectively.
Yes, precisely. And especially like when it comes to selling, because that's why for me, e-commerce SEO is a little bit more unique than just any SEO. And I've worked in both. I've worked in so many different industries, and like lately I focus on e-commerce more. So for me, that's why I wanted to highlight that, because there are tactics in SEO that I didn't mention in this presentation, like keyword research. I'm not gonna talk about that. Like that's like basic SEO things that are assumed across all industries. But for me, what's interesting is like what kind of tactics that are actually very, very useful to do it in an e-commerce setting, because they wouldn't make sense in other settings. That's what makes e-commerce more unique, because it has the ability to, and you also need to approach it differently because the intent is different. People are not necessarily looking for just pure information. They actually want to buy. How do they buy? You need to give them enough information. You need to understand that they're actually trusting you. There's a lot of trust here. They're actually like trusting you with their credit card information. They're trusting you with their personal data.
Yeah.
So it seems dramatic to say it that way, but it is true. So you need to provide that credibility both ways. And that's why optimizing for that is super important.
Perfect. Looks like we did have a couple questions come in. Andrew asks, do you view FAQ schema as an important implementation for e-commerce sites in 2021?
Good question. So that's a really good question. Okay, so I think it's a very subjective opinion. I do think of it as very important, not necessarily just for this year, like it's very useful, especially if your website contains a lot of like information that requires clarification. And I think of it more, not from a transactional point of view, more from the customer service experience. So if you have a page on your website where it's like customer care, I would recommend implementing it in that page versus in every single page on your website, because potentially if someone is like asking questions like, what is your return policy? How long does it take for you to ship your product? So questions that are more inquiries that are commonly attributed to your shopping experience, then I would recommend it. I don't think necessarily it will mean that you will get more money from it. I think for me, that's a distinction, because FAQ is more unique in the sense of like it's informational, versus like product schema. I think of it as like tangible in the sense of like how it looks in the actual search results. So I do think it's important. I just think it depends on your objective from implementing it. Are you hoping that if you do implement it, that the customer is going to get the information right away from Google, so they're not going to click to your website? So maybe that's a potential, not negative, but it potentially can affect your CTR because they had the answer before they even clicked on your website. So you have to really evaluate, like, are you willing to lose that potential click if they get the answer right away? If you're willing to, that's fine, because what you care about is what they're getting the information they need. But then again, you should still keep your customer care page because you want to make sure that it leverages that information as well. So for me, it's really an acting kind of like a balance between like, what do you want to do? Like with, for example, with product schema, it's important for me because it's like click-through rate. Because you know for a fact, like I'll show you my next slide. I know for a fact, like if you look at that screenshot at the bottom, that you saw in stock and you see the price like right here.
Yeah.
So most likely the person, they're like, okay, that's what I'm trying to find. Cool, they have it and it costs $200. Click. So more likely the click-through rate will increase versus another website that only has the actual description and that's it. You don't know any more information. So basically short answer, I took too long to answer, but basically short answer is it depends on what your objective is from implementing it and making sure that you're tracking that from a performance standpoint as well.
Awesome. And looks like we had one more question come through. What do you think about combining two types of structured data in one page, like product structured data and FAQ at the bottom of the page for the most asked questions about that product?
That's cool. I actually like that idea. I haven't done it myself. I haven't, because usually it really depends on, I can think of an example, like I would say Amazon would be a perfect example for combining these kind of schemas, like product and FAQ, because they have such detailed product display pages, like they're insane. They have so much information because they have the reviews, they have the buyer, the seller. So I think in that context, it would be useful to combine them because they're not competing with each other. Like they don't compete. They're both serving different purposes. And it's very possible to have more than one implementation. I would just say it really depends. I can't believe I just said it really depends. It's such an SEO answer. I apologize.
Right.
But it really depends. It really depends because it depends on how your website looks like. So for me, like that has to be tied to like how your website aesthetic looks like. And if it does have both FAQ to the product plus the product information, then I don't see any harm of applying both. I just think it has to really ultimately have information that can be surfaced in a way that wouldn't harm your user experience. If that makes sense.
That's a great question. Yeah, I mean, as long as I would say, as long as it's not something that's going to be competing.
Yes.
I mean, we always talk about, self-cannibalizing keywords and stuff like that. Like, you don't want to do the same thing with your schema. I would imagine there's a point to where it could have a negative impact if it's not implemented properly. But
Yes, or it could slow down. Like, because sorry, go ahead.
you're fine. I was just saying I'm not familiar with that either. So I mean that's an interesting take and an interesting idea.
Maybe whoever asked the question, we could have a separate like follow-up to see if they implemented. That would be a cool experiment, actually. That's a cool experiment to conduct because I'm interested even myself to know it's like how do they behave? Because I think of it more from a, I guess, search result. From a search result, it depends on the query because if the person is searching for the product, then what will surface is the product schema information. It wouldn't surface the FAQ. That's how I think about it. But then again, what if they're searching a question in the query? Like, I really think it's very subjective. So yes, whoever asked the question, like we can connect later. I don't know. And then do an experiment or something.
I like it. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
And someone was saying Home Depot does that. So yeah, I mean there are real world examples out there. But yeah, I think you're definitely right. It would depend on your site. I can think of many websites where it wouldn't be a good idea if you're overdoing it and you have like an about page and you're loading it up with a bunch of extra schema, like that could have some negative impacts. But again, it's kind of hard to tell. I mean, those larger websites, Home Depot, Amazon, and things like that, they have so much going on that it almost makes sense to have schema to kind of give you the refined bits without having to dig through everything. It's kind of like the cream of the crop sort of just the best little parts. So yeah, interesting
Exactly.
question. Great question, guys.
Yeah. And that's why I thought of Amazon, because I feel like Amazon is a great example of like an e-commerce company that overdoes all of these kind of things because they have these kind of capacity to create pages that way. Versus not every e-commerce site has that capacity or doesn't even, sometimes you don't even want that aesthetic. Sometimes it's like a branding decision. You don't want to like show that much information. You want to keep it like simple and to the point, and you focus on the schema that gives you that kind of information that will help your website rank.
Good
So
point.
that would be one. And there's also other kinds of schema, like there is website schema, org schema. So I would recommend these more on the home page. And I see the benefits of them more on the knowledge panel side, because it would help Google like show information about your organization right away, like your social media links, for example, your address, your phone number, and so on. But that's not really transactional, that's more informational.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, so just continuing on product schema specifically. So I mentioned earlier, schema.org is a great resource when it comes to just getting familiar with the different types of schema, what is more useful for you. And also another thing is, one of my favorite tools is Google's rich results test. So think of it like the best friend that you have, just to make sure that you can validate your implementation and that it's correct. And then it also tells you if it's like actually eligible for rich results. So like there's an example on the right side as well, and it will show you like if you have any errors, if you have any warnings. So the difference between errors and warnings is error is an actual mistake in how you implemented it. So you need to like recorrect it. Warning is not necessarily a bad thing. It's just telling you you didn't fill all of the attributes, but they're optional. So you're okay, like you're gonna survive this, but it's a warning because it's missing some attributes. And also, again, not all attributes are gonna be relevant for every e-commerce website. Sometimes it could be like, trying to think of an example, like some attribute, well, I can't think of an example, I love it. So there's some attributes right now.
Medium, large for computers probably wouldn't make sense.
Yeah, like there's so many attributes where some of them really don't make sense for your website. So you just have to make sure that you select the ones that are the most relevant to you. And then based on that, you optimize for it. And then the last thing is just there are different ways of doing it. Like for a very long time, people would do a schema through Google Tag Manager, but then I would recommend JSON LD because I find it just more effective, and it could be from a coding perspective, it doesn't necessarily slow your website because it's kind of like an added chunk of information that is in your back end, and it helps optimize it for Google, and it reads it in a more efficient way as well. And there's also like great resources online when it comes to like how to build schema, how to test it. But overall, just I would say the summary from this is really, if you don't have it, do it. If you have it, great. Make sure that you're actually monitoring it and make sure that you're able to attribute its success. So what I mean by that, like there are a lot of KPIs that you can track. And schema can maybe a bit tricky in terms of like, you cannot necessarily say, because I have schema, I made $200 extra. But the impact of it is more about the metrics, like click-through rates. You can even do experiments and compare when a search result has information like in stock compared to one that doesn't, which one has a better click-through rate, even if they rank the same. And then you can use that information to keep iterating and learning about your implementation as well.
Is there a way to do like A/B testing with schema as well? Like, or do you know of any way to implement that without having just a separate site?
No, it's not that. I wouldn't say you can A/B test it because honestly, with this, it has to be live unless you only do it on specific pages of your website and you exclude others. That would be the A/B test, but it wouldn't be direct variables, if that makes sense. Because for me, the idea of A/B testing is it has to be equivalent and you just play with variables. But if you're just separating one over the other, then it's trickier. But A/B testing is one of those things I'm very interested in, and I think it's a continuous field in terms of like evolution of how to be better at A/B testing for SEO, where many times it has to be live. But A/B testing, we cannot split it for search engines, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes it a little trickier when you have to take into account Google as well.
Yes, because they're gonna read it anyway. They're gonna find it because you have it like indexable and live and so on. Yeah, perfect. Moving on to image search optimization. So image search by itself is such a big topic, and I really believe in it, even though it's a bit controversial because for a very long time, like Google Analytics, I don't know if you guys heard about this, but they were supposed to attribute it as a separate channel. And for me, I was very excited about this because it's one of these things, especially when you're pitching it as a project, to make sure that you want to optimize your images, you need to always tie it back to revenue. You need to prove most times, especially when you work in bigger organizations, that, well, we're spending that much resources and that much tech efforts, how much money would it bring? So there has to be some sort of like a monetary ROI on it. And for some point, actually, so you know when you go to like your like channel breakdown on Google Analytics and it tells you like this came from direct, from organic, affiliates, and so on. At some point, Google promised that they will add Google Images as a channel. I was very excited because I'm like, okay, that's awesome, because finally we're able to tie revenue to image search. Like if someone clicks on this image and then they go to your website, are they gonna actually convert? And if so, can we trace it back to them? So that's the idea of the kind of the funnel. But then this was very mysterious. I don't know, this is like maybe scandalous. So like at some point, they just never followed up with this and they just updated the blog post that was published about it with a little bit of a note at the top saying, we've decided we're not gonna like have this as a separate channel. Like it didn't even provide a lot of context on it, but it was very interesting because it was very like subtle. They didn't make a big fuss about it, but they just said we're no longer gonna be having a separate attribution for Google Images. Because for a very long time, they really tried, maybe I'm going into too much right now, but they tried to sell the idea of Google Images. Because you know, you have something called PLAs, which is product like listing campaigns. So the PLAs are more, sometimes when you go to Google Images, you see at the top an actual carousel of products that are sponsored. So these are where advertisers pay money for their images. And that's not in the screenshot right now, but that's just an example. So in order for them to kind of sell these ideas of shopping campaigns through images, you need to like attribute revenue dollars. So I just thought it's a little interesting story. And I mean, it's not a tactic, but I just wanted to provide context on it. So I just think from a Google image perspective, I still believe in it, even if it doesn't have direct revenue attribution. And one way you can think about it and to optimize for it is to use Google Search Console. And I'll keep mentioning Google Search Console because it's also a very useful tool because it gives you insights that are specific to other metrics, things like impressions, clicks, rankings, click-through rates. So you can use these metrics to tell a story about your performance, even if it's not just dollar values. So it could be like you can prove that that amount of people saw your image that belongs to your e-commerce site and that much clicked on it. And usually they have a very high CTR, like it can go up to 30 to 40% CTR. And these users actually visited your website. And maybe they didn't buy right away, but maybe they bookmarked it. And potentially in a week or a month, they will come back because they'll remember, hey, like I saw that quote that I like. What was that website? I bookmarked the image. So image search becomes super powerful as a way to discover your content and as a way to help your customers really through their discovery journey. And that's why I go back to search intent, because search intent is very important. Image search compared to like regular search, the intent is different. Intent here could be exploration. It could be that someone, and like I thought of loungewear as an example because like especially with COVID, with lockdowns, the amount of interest in people buying things for like staying at home spiked. So they saw one of the like very popular products that started to sell out in 2020 and this year as well is things that are to do with like candles, things for like desktop monitors, things like pajamas or sweatpants and so on, things that like are comfortable for people to be using while they're staying at home. So for that reason, you have to think about what kind of queries people are searching on Google Images. And you can use your Search Console as a way to understand how people discover your website and as a way to track the performance. But with all of that in mind, I wanted to give key winning tactics to really optimize your images. And this is specifically very useful for websites that have original images. What I mean by that is it's their own images. Like you actually potentially shot the image and it's your model or it's your product versus it's a stock image. Like I wouldn't be worried if it's a stock image because it's not really your content, right? It's not something that's going to make a huge difference to you. Versus if it's your content and it really is copyrighted and it belongs to your website, then why not optimize it? You already spent money getting these images done. So make sure that you're optimizing them so that people can find them. So with that in mind, some of the key winning tactics that I recommend is number one, if possible, to use a CDN, which is Content Delivery Network. And this is specifically useful for big websites that have a lot of images from e-commerce perspective. So you can host your images on a CDN. There are so many good ones. Like one example is Cloudinary. They basically, again, it's paid and they host your images, and it also helps kind of like improve your page speed, because instead of hosting everything on your server, you're hosting it with a CDN, so it actually loads faster for users. And that's especially true when people don't have the same patience. If the page takes too long to load, you're going to close the tab. You're like, screw this, I'm not going to stay any longer. I do that too. I'm like, whatever, I close the tab if it's taking too long to load. So you need to really optimize for speed, and to do that, you host images on the CDN. So that's the one thing that's very fundamental. The other thing is CNAME. So CNAME is basically canonical name. What happens sometimes when you actually use a CDN, they're using their actual CDN name as the image URL. But I wouldn't recommend this. I would actually, from experience, and I've done it, I would recommend that you use a CNAME. So you can like purchase a subdomain under that's similar to your domain. Like you can call it like the name of your company media, the name of your company image. You can be really creative with it and use that as a CNAME to like mask the CDN that you're using. So it also helps you send another signal to Google that, hey, Google, this is my image. This is part of my domain. And it really helps add an additional push when it comes to optimization.
So,
and also,
sorry, just to jump in real quick. If you're using, like, let's say a CNAME, and you are using that in order to kind of mask who you're using for CDN, does that, how do you tie that in with your existing regular domain, or can you, or is it, if you're using a CDN, it's always going to be hosted through them and using like a CNAME?
exactly, you got it. The second one, that's the one. It's basically you're using the CDN to host your images, and it's still them. You're not like getting rid of them. You're just using a name to like show instead of their name. And that's totally normal. Like they even help you implement it. So you would buy like a subdomain that has your name plus image or your name plus media. And it would just help. For me, I like it because it just helps add an additional push to Google to understand, or any other search engine, that this is part of your domain, part of your like brand. And then alt text. So alt text, for me, this is super, super, super important, because if you actually read a little bit about the history of alt text, the reason it started, it was actually more for people who have accessibility issues, or sometimes even the image has an X, like it's not loading. So the alt text will actually show. So it helps people know what the image is about. So alt text is very useful, and it has to be descriptive and it has to be concise. And ultimately, what I would recommend is, that's why you have to think about what kind of keywords bring the customers through images. So let's say if someone is looking for like a gray sweatpants for men or something like that. Okay, so you need to make sure that your alt text of that image includes and captures these keywords that people are looking for, so that also Google starts to rank your images based on the most relevant keywords that people are searching for. So that's why also it ties back to like being descriptive, being concise, including, you're not going to write a paragraph, but maybe you're going to write like one sentence to describe it in a very clear way, and it includes the keywords that you want to optimize. So that's also Google understands what the image is about, and then it starts to rank it in search results. And then product schema. So this ties back to the previous point, and that's why I love product schema, because within the attributes of product schema, there's a field that has image URL. So you're actually leveraging both. Both of them are connected, and that's why SEO also is it never stops. Like everything that you do tells something else about the other thing, and they're all interconnected. And the more you have that mindset, then you're able to see the powerful implementation across different fields. So like you implemented schema. Schema also will benefit your image optimization, because within it, if you look at the example, like you see like misguided.eu, it says in stock right there in green. So actually Google is able to pull that information from the schema, because it understands, okay, this is product, and it shows you like it's a product tag. So customers right away, they understand that this is a product. They click on it, it takes them to the product page, and then more likely they will convert based on that. Versus like sometimes it's not in the screenshot, but sometimes it actually says out of stock, like it would be in red. So right away, the customer knows, well, this is not available. Maybe I'm not interested, but at least they had the information right away. So that's where also attributes from schema will be useful to your image search as well. And this is actually like a new implementation. Like I believe it was just like maybe like less than a year or so that Google started to show the availability in images. But it shows that if you're really proactive in how you implement SEO, then many of the things will start to make sense in different aspects of search. So at first you do it in your schema, and at the time it was just recommended you should all do schema. But then now actually Google is using it more actively, even in image search, to show like information about whether this is a product page, this is available, what's the price, and so on.
Yeah, even just having like the ability to see that right away that it's a product. Even the in stock or out of stock is like even an icing on the cake, but even just the fact that you can immediately see this is a shoppable image, I think is
Exactly.
huge because, I mean, you see some of the images below and like you could be like, oh man, on the bottom left, I really love like the color of that, the sweatpants that she has. Like, but I'm like, I look at that and I'm like, oh, but that's just an image. It doesn't really tell me much. Whereas I see that top row and I see all the product tags and I immediately know that like I could click on it and I could buy that thing right now.
Mm-hmm.
I know it's like saying that out loud, it sounds like such a small, trivial variation of like, well, if you use your head, you can look at it and see that it's instyle.com and they probably will link out to it. And like, I mean, yeah, you can do some thinking and clearly get to what you want, but I think like our crocodile brain, like that just instant reaction of like what you are seeing, I think just that tag is like just enough to like maybe if I'm on the fence, push me towards one or the other. And that's, I mean, when you're looking at click-through rates, when you're looking at SEO, when you're trying to optimize, like that's really what you're after is like those marginal variations that you can make that can have huge outcomes. You might only persuade someone 1% more your way, but that 1% could result in, you know, making or breaking your business.
100%. Exactly. And I mean, that thought process already shows like that you're thinking as an SEO, like you're really approaching it from an optimization framework versus like expecting things to like work right away.
Mm-hmm.
No, it's you're optimizing. You already have your content, you have your website, you have your images. Keep on optimizing, keep on improving the experience, and think about how all of them tie together. And that's for me, that's a perfect example between like schema, alt text, images, information, and so on. They all tell the same story together.
Those tie together perfectly well in this example here.
Yeah. Any questions on this?
Doesn't look like we have any popping in right now. We should be good.
Moving on to online reputation management. So I wanted to highlight this specifically because, again, we're talking about e-commerce SEO, and it is so, so important that really your success as an e-commerce website, it hinges on customer satisfaction and reviews. Because you can have like the best SEO strategy in the entire world, but if people go buy from you and they hate your product or they hate your service or they hate how long it took to ship the product, they're gonna like destroy you on the internet. So, and the internet is not a kind place sometimes. So you really need to like pay attention to how is your reputation online, and you need to actively manage it. And I really think of it, even though it's not direct SEO, I would argue it is, because it's connected to your search appearance, it's connected to your search visibility, to even your brand, and all of them are part of your entire business strategy. So again, really think about it from what I mentioned earlier, which is the customer-centric approach. Put yourself in the shoes of customers and ask yourself, what type of queries would my customer type in Google to find out about my service? What would you type? Like even Ben, if I tell you, like you want to buy from a website, what would you type?
I mean, it depends on what I'm buying, but if I'm shopping for a coat, I would shop for, you know, down winter coat or warm winter coats or something like that. North Face winter coat.
And maybe you would write reviews, right? Because like North Face, like maybe Canada Goose, you're like, they're a bit pricey. I want to see if they're good before I commit to buying them. So you go and you type Canada Goose reviews. Most likely, people will include the word reviews in their search query because they just want to read like what other people are saying about this product or about this brand or about this company. So really, I would recommend you do this to your like business. So just take a step back and go and search like the name of your company, the name of your website, plus reviews. When you do that, look at the first page of Google. What does the customer see or what does the person see? And then try to think about how to optimize based on that. And the reason for this, because many times you're less likely to be the first ranking result. More likely it's going to be external websites that are more trusted when it comes to reviews, like an actual authoritative website. And I gave an example here. I don't know if you guys, are you familiar with Trustpilot? I don't know if you've heard of it before.
Yeah.
It's one of the really like most, I would say, very, very popular reviews platform. And it's more objective because they're not driven by some sort of a financial like contribution. Like really, it's people writing reviews about brands, about businesses. So most likely these kind of websites are actually going to be ranking instead of your actual website. So that's why I say like search it first, see what shows up, and then prioritize. So there's other websites. There's another website called SiteJabber. That's another one. There's so many of these platforms that are designed as reviews platform. Sometimes one ranks over the other. But for me, it really depends on your business. Look at the first organic ranking. That's the one that you should focus on, in my opinion, and then trickle it down, especially if you have limited resources. So you just need to prioritize like what is the most visible organically, what is the most popular website that people go to, and then focus your efforts on that. So that's where I mentioned like Trustpilot as an example, because you really need to go into it and see your profile. And then when you do that, sometimes there's options like you need to claim the listing. You need to like sometimes even have a business account. If you have enough budgets to do that, I would recommend doing that because it would really allow you to not just monitor your reviews and your platform, but also engage with your customers directly. Like actually respond to the reviews. And it doesn't have to be the SEO person doing this. It could be, if you're big enough as a company, it could be your customer experience team, or you could even delegate someone to manage it. But still, it should be in relation to SEO when it comes to like, how can you ensure that your organic visibility is tied to your reputation online? So thinking about these sort of platforms is super important. And you can also get creative. Like there are many ways where platforms like that, like it allows you to create custom profiles. So you can actually have your brand even more visible in relation to how you're telling a story about it, even on an existing and third-party website. So that's another important way of managing your reputation. Another one, which is a free tool, is Google My Business. So I love Google My Business personally, like, because I think it's a great way to like manage and optimize your local SEO. And it can be chaotic. So you really need to think of it as also part of like your strategy, especially local SEO strategy and your tactics, where you continuously, number one, if you haven't claimed your listing, claim your listing, make sure that you create an account on Google My Business, and then actually keep an eye on the reviews that people write, respond to them. You can even, they've added new features like writing posts. You can actually write kind of like a social media post on Google My Business. And it's really cool because first it's free, like you're not losing anything. And then it's also coming from Google. So they will always tie data when it comes to like how people are finding you. So they show you information like how many clicks you got on the Google map, how many people clicked on your website, how many clicked on directions, how many called you. So metrics like calls, directions, website clicks, these are all important because they're still tied to your business strategy and it goes back to your website. Ultimately, if all of them are improving, you're still improving your business as a whole. So really think of your online reputation management, never ignore that, and make it also the center when it comes to like an ongoing way of engaging with your customers and making sure that your search appearance is optimized beyond just like keyword research and let me like write blogs and let me like outreach. No, like think about it from a customer perspective and make sure that you are, when they search you, they find the best things about you online.
Yeah, and to your point of replying to comments and stuff, it's huge. I mean, after you kind of pointed that out, I started thinking about it. It's like I do type in reviews after like every new purchase. Like I'll caveat that by saying anything that I'm spending like more than like $50 on, like I thoroughly like go through all the reviews. I am that type of person. And so like if I'm looking at like a new humidifier or something like that, air purifier for my home because I'm spending so much more time home, like if I'm going to spend $100 on something, I'm clicking on the reviews. And so to that point, like furthering your customer experience of like how you want to be perceived by your customer, like that's another huge aspect. Like respond to those reviews because if someone gives you a bad review or a good review, like I notice when companies write back. I genuinely notice like if someone's like, "Hey, like I had an issue and this like didn't work or this was broken when it arrived." If that company is responding back like same day and like we're so sorry about this, like let's make it right, or hey, this is kind of what happens, like whatever their answer is, like some sort of response tells me that they're active and they're engaged, like kind of what I was talking about before, like with adding schema and stuff. It's like if you look at something where you're about to spend money and you see that they're minding their P's and Q's and they're following along with what's going on in their customers, like it gives such a better buying signal and such a more sense of ease to any customer that's going to be coming through.
Yeah. 100%. Because if you spend that much money responding to, that much time spending to people, responding to them, that means you care enough that if something happens, you'll follow up with them.
Yeah.
So again, it goes back to trust and building credibility. And that's why you need to manage your reputation. And I think that's people how used to do even before e-commerce. Like, why should I trust you? Why should I buy from you? Same idea, but from a digital perspective.
Yeah, agreed.
Awesome. Then international SEO. So this is like, that could be a whole other presentation. I also think I said the same thing about every single slide. So
go through.
There's a lot. So sorry guys if this is taking too long, but international SEO. So as we know, like e-commerce is increasingly becoming global, and you really need to understand localization and understand how international markets work. And again, this could maybe not be as relevant for a smaller company that only operates in its country and that's it. So maybe this would not make sense. But then for e-commerce companies that are big ambitions to ship globally, to grow beyond their core markets, then you need to really think about international SEO, and you need to think about how to implement it in a way so that you're localizing and that you're also capturing traffic from different sources, from different countries in different ways. And one point I want to mention is really you need to make sure that you have hreflang tags. And I wanted to highlight it here, even though it's tech SEO, because many times when you have a massive website that has different languages or different regions that it serves, you need to tell Google, hey, these are not duplicate contents. So that's the idea of hreflang tags. You're telling Google that even though this says ENCA and this is ENUS, they look the same, but one is designed for an American audience with USD, and one is designed for a Canadian audience with CAD. So you need to tell these are canonicals, and that's hreflang tags, and you put them on your back end as well. And it helps Google understand that when someone, and that's why they're important. So when someone is searching from Montreal, they will get your website ENCA. That's the variation they're gonna get. But if someone is searching from New York, they're gonna get ENUS. So you need to optimize, you need to make sure that you have that at the core tech SEO perspective from an international point of view, because especially if you have more than one language, more than one country, you wanna make sure that you're showing them the correct language, the correct geography that they're searching from. And based on that, you're also optimizing your e-commerce experience, because believe me, like you would be upset if you go search something and then it's actually in Canadian dollars and you're like, oh my God, this is so cheap. And then it turns out to be USD. You know, and it happens to me the other way around. I think for you guys, it's better. For us, it sucks in Canada because it's like, actually, it's USD is more expensive, because I'm like, oh, wow, it's so cheap. And then I'm like, oh, wait, this is USD. So like add like $50 extra or something, you know? So that's why it's important, because you're actually engaging across borders, and you need to tell Google that these are not duplicate pages and I'm optimizing them for international markets. And then that way it will understand and it will serve your website in the language and in the region it's intended for. So that's tech SEO. But then the other thing that I wanted to highlight from an international SEO perspective is I cannot like emphasize enough that you really need to think beyond Google. And yes, Google is the biggest search engine, no doubt. And I always use Google as a reference just because it is what it is. It's like more than 94% is coming from Google searches. So we always tend to, we tend to have a bias when it comes to like even our own experience in SEO. It's always catered for like Google guidelines, Google own search results, and so on. Doesn't mean you should ignore Bing and Yahoo, even if they contribute a small percentage. But in this context, you need to think when it comes to international markets, Google is not necessarily as prominent in certain countries. So you need to understand these search engines, and you need to really build, and most times all of them share the same common algorithm in the sense of like they're all intended for users. They all want to help people find information. So all of them will have a sitemap. All of them will need keywords. They will need alt text. They will need titles, descriptions. They will all share that. The difference is going to be in the way they process information or the way their guidelines differ. So for example, in China, Google is actually blocked. So most people do not really use Google. They use Baidu. Baidu is a super popular Chinese engine, very insane, I have to say, because I optimize for it, and it's like madhouse, because the way the algorithm works is completely different from how Google works. So you really need to spend time when it comes to international SEO, reading and familiarizing yourself with how search engines work abroad and building specific templates and specific guidelines around them. So like an example, sitemaps. Like sitemaps for Baidu, for example, have slightly different requirements. Like even as simple as the file size is different in Baidu compared to Google. It sounds very simple, but it is, because so you need to optimize for each search engine, and you need to also understand them. So like Baidu is for China, another is Yandex, so that's for Russia. Naver is for South Korea, and there are many examples, but I wanted to highlight these three specifically because these are, I would say, the biggest in terms of their proximity to how Google is massive in their respective countries. And by really putting yourself in the shoes of the customer you're trying to sell to, whether they're in Seoul or they're in Russia, then you're able to know, maybe they're not going to go to Google, they're actually going to use Yandex. How does Yandex work? And then maybe you can even hire specialists when it comes to the language they work in, or you need to just understand how to optimize for this and keep it in mind when it comes to like, even when you claim your, so I mentioned Google Search Console before, same thing. All of these search engines, they have their own separate tools for Search Console. So like there's Baidu Webmaster Tools. You can claim that. And then you can actually see how Baidu reads your website, how Baidu processes your information. Same thing with Naver and so on. So I just wanted to like spend a little bit more time, just hopefully like this would be inspirational for people to read about other search engines and see like how they also interact, and they even have a different look and feel. They prioritize different things, and that's why like consumer behavior for me is very important for SEO. It's really about psychology. Like if we really like, honestly, if we just like forget about like the big thing to think about out of this is psychology. It's like you're speaking to humans. How do people think? How do people search? So when you think about it from a, and I think maybe that's why I love SEO, because I've always been interested in human psychology. It's like, why do people make decisions? Why does Ben search this instead of this? Why? What motivates you? What makes you want to spend like an hour reading reviews for a code versus someone who's like, whatever, I'm just going to buy this. So these different behavior patterns should be the way how you approach search strategy. And then that will kind of trickle down to every tactic that you take.
Yeah. And I mean, even inside of that, taking it without jumping too far, but taking that even a step further, if you're considering different countries that you're trying to serve, like also take into account like the different cultures. So like how people search differently.
Exactly.
It sounds kind of rudimentary, if you will, but like people search differently. Like people ask questions differently. The process for how you buy something online is going to be different. Although it may seem trivial or very minute, again, we're talking about fractions of a percent that can make or break a business. And again, it's always that continual optimization. So maybe even spending a little bit of time just to kind of research about where the variations are in shopping behavior in general.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And even maybe for more context, actually the future of e-commerce is not in North America. It's actually in Asia. It's in China, mostly. China, Korea, and other countries that are actually will be driving e-commerce a lot more, and they have more demand for it, and they contribute a lot more money when it comes to e-commerce patterns as well. So that means if you're not already thinking about it, you're already missing out. So even if you're not implementing it this year, you have to think ahead. It's thinking ahead for the next 5, 10 years and so on.
Yeah, good point. Definitely.
And then I just wanted to like have this, I just like this graph because like I was doing a lot of research and I thought this was a really cool graph to include, because really ultimately with every single tactic I talked about, whether I mentioned schema, image optimization, sitemap, reputation management, international SEO, all of this should work together and in parallel to continuously optimize your website. So SEO, I would say it never stops. Like it's not a sort of thing that you're like, okay, I'm done, goodbye, that's it. No, like it's always going to be something that you have to work on. And this could be annoying for some, but it also could be a challenge because that makes you always think of creative ideas that also make you like look ahead and optimize it. So really it's an ongoing cycle where you need to think of everything, whether it's from a tech SEO perspective, from optimizing for your keywords. And also there's a whole other aspect, which is off-page SEO, like backlinks. I didn't mention it in my presentation because like that's a whole other word, but it's very important. And you guys are really good at that as well when it comes to like outreach and understanding like how to build links and how to ensure that your off-page SEO is in parallel with your on-page SEO, because you need to build your authority, your trustworthiness. So the principles of EAT that influence Google's ranking as well. So you need to always optimize for your like link building, your content, how you submit it to search engines, in addition to like analyzing the traffic. So like, does this work or this doesn't work? How can I improve and iterate? And then when you also collect these data, it becomes a way for you to like measure your success and to also set benchmarks. So if you know, for example, that X percentage contributes, like organic search contributes that much to your website, then you can put targets. You want to like increase the percentage of revenue coming from organic traffic. And especially like with organic traffic, that's the beauty of it. It's really like free, you can argue, because you're not paying for it. You're not spending millions sometimes of dollars to bid for keywords, and you don't have campaigns. You're not paying Google. You're basically earning it. You're earning it. You're earning it through every single effort you've worked on. Therefore, Google and other search engines recognize this and start to rank your website in queries. And then people find you through search. So organically, you've earned that trust and you've earned that kind of traffic. So that's why it's like a continuous process. It's a nonstop cycle of always optimizing, always like tying every single piece together, experimenting, learning as you go, and so on.
Yeah, I have a friend that's an SEO that put it in terms once that just always resonated with me, and it's he has a small business, and he's like, I can post on my Instagram and Facebook and Twitter about XYZ products or packages that I offer for my business, and I can do that and I can sustain a business. But the problem is that you have to do that every single day. He said that the beauty of SEO is that it's something that continues to work when you're not working.
Mm-hmm.
And so like the fact that he pointed out, he's like, I can get leads coming in from Instagram, but that's only when I'm like constantly like chugging away at it. He's like, the beauty of SEO is like you can get it to a point to where you can basically have it to where it's going to help gain you leads or clients passively, more so than if you're having to actively manage a paid ad campaign, or just, you know, if you're going the free route, constantly having to post to social media or constantly sending out emails trying to get interest in who you are. And that always just kind of resonated with me. And this is like such a great point that kind of caveats or kind of dovetails in nicely with that.
Yeah, and also like I think it further confirms that all your efforts are worth it. Because yes, you are continuously optimizing, but it's not like, yes, you're staying up at night trying to post something. You're just thinking ahead in terms of tactics, and then you're optimizing it on an ongoing basis, and then you're reaping the benefits of everything you've done through organic traffic, through ranking, through even as simple as like people finding your website and they're like, oh, I love what you're selling. Like things like that, that will be like also rewarding from just an overall business strategy perspective.
For sure.
And just closing thoughts. Last thing I promise. And then it's really, I just wanted to, with everything I've talked about, if like we do a quick recap in terms of really covering the tech foundational SEO when it comes to like sitemaps, internal linking, schema, image, international, every single part of it, very important. But ultimately, search and SEO is really at the heart of e-commerce, which requires agility and continuous learning. So you really have to have that mindset when you approach it, and also be willing to like sometimes fail. I don't want to say fail, but learn, because sometimes things are not going to work out, and that's okay. At least you tried it, and maybe you learned from it. Maybe you learned that, well, when I changed this, I don't know, this product title to this, it resulted in a decrease. Then I shouldn't do it again. I'll do this instead. So it's really all about having an agile approach and continuously learning and challenging yourself to really think ahead when it comes to that. And you also always have to tie every tactic that you do to the customer experience. Why is that important? Because when you think like that, everything you will do will automatically make it better for the customer. Also, search intent is really central to driving results. So when you think of your keyword research strategy, when you think of how people discover your website, think of the intent. What do they actually want out of this? Is it because they're looking for information? So that's like informational intent. Or is it because it's transactional? They actually want to buy something. Or maybe it's navigational. They're just wanting to read more about what you offer. And then based on that, you can map out your success. You can map out the kind of keywords or the kind of pages that you should be creating and that you should be targeting based on what the customer is looking for. So search intent should be at the foundation as well. And lastly, your SEO, your e-commerce SEO strategy, it really should be a balancing act of short-term and long-term tactics that include a diverse range of on-page, technical, and off-page SEO. And all of it will come together and all of it will result in success for your business because you're able to not just rely on one thing, you're able to actually balance out all of these aspects together and then create a better experience ultimately for the user who's looking for your information. And just lastly, I thought it was interesting. I wanted to share this. I personally like there's a lot of tools that Google provides, like their blog. I find is very useful just to stay up to date with their like information, their news, and also they do a really cool thing at the end of the year where they publish like year in search. If you guys have never seen it before, I really recommend it. I love it. So I just included a screenshot from their link. So I put it at the end as well. So if you just want to see what were the search trends for 2020, I recommend that you check it out. And it's really insightful because it really is about people. It's about us. It's about the human race and what we want and what we're looking for and how we live our life. So yeah, ultimately SEO is all about that. And I hope you guys enjoyed this and thank you so much. Any questions?
Wow, that was fantastic. Thank you so much. Yeah, if you guys have any questions, go ahead and pop those into the chat down below, and we'll make sure we get those answered for you. Anisa, that was awesome. I feel like I just went all back through SEO school all over again and just got a refresher on everything. Yeah, I love that you tied everything back to like design for the user, like design for the customer. I think that is such a important aspect and mindset to maintain. And also, I mean, just don't forget what the O in SEO stands for. Like it's optimization. Like you're not going to be perfect. It's not going to be, you're not always going to be going up either. Like sometimes you're going to take a back step and that's all right. But it's all about learning and figuring out where those small granular opportunities can be and trying to leverage those. So we definitely appreciate you joining us today. That was amazing.
Thank you.
Looks like Andrew is asking, is that the same necklace Alexis Rose wears on Schitt's Creek?
Yes, yes, it is. I literally looked for it.
I haven't watched that show yet, and everyone else in our department talks about it all the time, and I'm the odd man out here.
Yes, Andrew, good. I'm so proud of you. Literally, I was so obsessed with your necklace. Like I'm a victim of my own marketing. I swear it's hilarious because like I'm fully aware of how e-commerce works, how marketing works, and I still like do it. Like I'm a victim of my own thing, I swear. So I was obsessed with her necklace, like short story. I went and searched for like a necklace Alexis wearing, like I literally like a whole long tail query. And I found a website, which was fascinating. All they do is they show you what different actors are wearing in movies and shows, and they tag the brands that you can buy it from. So I was like, this is amazing. So I found this whole other website. I'm going to try to find it. Maybe I'll send it to you afterwards. But it was a really interesting website. Literally, the entire premise of the website is that they talk about movies and shows, and then they put screenshots and they tag the products that the actors are wearing. So I was able to find it. And it's from Anthropology, if anyone wants to buy it as well.
Man,
So,
talk about image optimization opportunities there.
yeah. Yeah, I didn't get paid for this, I swear. Like they should not pay me for this. Like I just gave them like free advertising for this. Yeah. But
Awesome.
thank you so much for
Well,
having
thank
me.
you so much for joining us again. That was fantastic. We're looking forward to having you back again soon, hopefully.
Thank you so much. Take
Thank you
care.
guys for joining us. Again, we are going to have this recorded episode up available for you guys hopefully a little bit later today, if not within the next day or two. That'll be on our website or, of course, on our YouTube page. So youtube.com/page1power. Anisa, thank you again so much. Hope you enjoy the rest of your week and stay safe out there. And we'll see you guys next time.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
See ya.
Bye.